Section C of the Great Divide Trail was 15 days in length, so I've divided it into two parts. The first part from Kananaskis to Banff, and the second part from Banff to Field, British Columbia. The total distance for Part A of Section C was 104.3 kilometers, and the highest point was Citadel Pass at 2,390 meters. Day 30, July 25th. I started out at Bolton Creek in Kananaskis and made my way to Forks Campground. Along Upper Kananaskis Lakes, the winds were incredibly strong, and they were for most of the day. I reflected upon the situation in Banff and wondered whether winds would fan the fires even more, or whether the recent rains would help get the fires under control. From Forks Campground, I had planned to take the South Kananaskis Pass alternate route to Beatty Lake. This involved a climb of 300 meters, and as I started out on this alternate route, things began to look ominous.
Good God, what have I got myself into? Look at this place.
A while later, I met a group of youth coming down. Their leader took me aside and told me that the previous night they had seen the fires in Invermere from Beatty Lake, so this wasn't a good sign. As I climbed, I had rain, and the rain turned to light snow, and then within a few minutes I was in the middle of a raging snowstorm. I didn't want to be in the middle of a snowstorm on the side of a cliff, so I decided to head back down towards Forks Campground. Part of the problem was that I hadn't anticipated the cold weather and only had a shell on, and by the time I got back to Forks Campground, I was nearly hypothermic. Fortunately, the rain had stopped by then, and I was able to get some lunch and a cup of tea in me and warm up. And I still had a lot of time. It was only mid-afternoon, so I decided to make another attempt to get to Beatty Lake. As I ascended, it got cloudy, and then very soon an electrical storm started.
So I get out of the snowstorm. I go downhill. I go to Forks Campground. The sun comes out. I dry off a little bit. I wring out my shoes. I figure, oh, I can try it again. Guess what happens? Talk about mountain weather being unpredictable.
I headed back down to Forks Campground, cold and defeated. I didn't have reservations. I was far more concerned about making sure that I was healthy and in good shape. I got my tent set up at Forks Campground, and I was warm and dry, but my phone wasn't in such good condition. It wasn't working well. And somehow I had managed to get a substantial amount of water inside my USB battery pack. So when I turned it over, a whole bunch of water dribbled out of it, and it was malfunctioning. I was able to put it inside my sleeping bag to warm up and dry out overnight. And by 3 a.m., I was able to get the battery pack to start charging the phone again so that I could continue navigation on the following day. Day 31, July 26th. I woke up at Forks Campground. It was dry but overcast, and I was renewed and ready to make my way to Birdwood Campground, which was today's objective. This was 35 kilometers away from my current position, so I had a lot of hiking to do. And to do that, I decided to follow the regular Great Divide Trail route rather than the South Kananaskis Pass alternate route. It had the advantage of having one less ford, in other words, a stream crossing with no bridge, and the route was slightly easier, so it allowed me to make rapid progress that day. The route down from North Kananaskis Pass at 2,338 meters was quite challenging. It started off with scree at the top and then gave way to thick, overgrown, wet vegetation at the bottom. I got wetter and wetter, and by the time I reached the ford, I found that I basically had no need to put on my sandals. I just trudged through the river with my regular trail hiking shoes. Since I was so wet, it didn't matter. At lunch, I met a hiker named Adam who knew the area quite well. Then it was time to go up over Palliser Pass at 2,079 meters. The route continued to be challenging with lots of vegetation, but by the time I was over top of Palliser Pass and into Banff National Park, things got dramatically better. I managed to make Birstall Campground. The light was failing, and rather than continue on hiking in the dark to Birdwood Campground, so I did a daily total of 28 kilometers that day. Pretty good, but not quite what I'd planned. Day 32, July 27th. My thermometer overnight recorded a low of 3 degrees Celsius. And when I got up in the morning, I had my first opportunity to try out my puffy jacket. And in this case, it was in combination with a whole bunch of other layers because it was darn cold. As I was leaving camp, I met Adam once again, who informed me of some great places to take some iconic photos of Mount Assiniboine. Most of the rest of the day was uneventful, except for place where there was a sign warning of high bear conflicts in the area. So I spent the next 2 hours yelling, "Hey bear," every 5 or 10 minutes. I don't want to tangle with the grizzly bear, thank you very much. Day 33, July 28th. Today's route takes me past Marvel Lake and Wonder Pass at 2,377 meters. I can only hope that today's route will be as marvelous and as wonderful as other people have found in the past. The good news is, I wasn't disappointed. My plan was to camp at Lake Magog at 14 kilometers and take in the views of Mount Assiniboine. However, by mid-afternoon, the smoke had closed in and the photography, well, it really wasn't going to happen. I decided to continue on to Og Lake, a further 4 kilometers, and get some distance in that day instead. This is one of the most popular sections of the GDT, and it's not hard to understand why, looking at the local scenery with the mountains and glaciers. There are plenty of trail runners, day hikers, and sightseers on the trails, and overhead, the sound of helicopters throbs as well-to-do sightseers take in the views of the glaciers and the mountains. The area around Og Lake is quite unique. The valley in which it lies doesn't have much vegetation, and the lake is crystal clear and great for swimming. The valley surrounding Og Lake seems to be the result of a cold trap, the high elevation, and a pocket desert. The area above the valley has lots of trees, but the valley itself is dry. So what appears to be happening is that cold air from the surrounding hills descends into the valley, creating what's called a cold trap. The valley itself is basically tundra. The area is also very dry, and that may be the result of a pocket desert. There are mountains to the west blocking precipitation, and so in this area there's a localized area with very low precipitation and not a lot of vegetation in the area as a result. Day 34, July 29th. So the smoke continues this morning, so I've decided to continue on to Howard Douglas Lake tonight and Banff tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'd love to take photos of Mount Assiniboine, but it's just too smoggy and I can't afford to wait an entire day for it.
I did manage to round out my collection of wildflower photos, however, so here they are.
Citadel Pass at 2,390 meters is quite impressive. The pass lies below an impressive rock formation that looks like an ancient castle. At 2,270 meters, Howard Douglas Lake is very high and very windy. It's in the subalpine. While I was trying to make dinner, my entire dinner was blown off the picnic bench onto the ground, and I spent the next 10 minutes picking up the pieces and putting my dinner back together so that I would have something to eat that night. Then it was time to bundle into my sleeping bag for a cold night. I had a 4:45 a.m. start to catch the first shuttle from Sunshine Village down to Banff, so I had to get up early. Day 35, July 30th. That morning's hike started with a 200-meter climb, and then it was downhill all the way to first Upper Sunshine Village and then the Lower Village where I picked up the shuttle. It was kind of interesting coming down from Howard Douglas Lake and being parallel with the tops of some of the chairlifts. Arriving in Banff was a bit of culture shock. Looking down the sidewalk, I could see more people in one glance than I had seen in the previous 34 days. Banff was in full summer tourist mode, and I was not ready for that many people. Immediately after arriving, the hunt for supplies began. I needed a new pair of shoes. After all, the Gore-Tex had failed. A new watch to replace the one that was dangling from my pack. A new pair of pants. And a higher capacity SD card for my phone to store more raw video. My supplies had been sent to the Banff post office, so I wasn't concerned about groceries, and I would pick those up later. I also found the Banff candy store, where I got some more salt licorice to replenish my supply for the next few days. I then found my way to the hostel, where I did my laundry prior to going out for dinner with my sister and brother-in-law who had come into town to have dinner with me. We went to a really nice Greek restaurant, and the waiter there was fascinated by me being a thru hiker on the GDT. Day 36, July 31st. I slept in and then walked downtown to do the rest of my shopping. Banff doesn't seem to open until 10 a.m., so I had a lot of time to enjoy my coffee waiting for the shops to open. Shod with some new waterproof treads and sporting Timex's Best on my wrist, I made my way to the public library. I had been unable to find a good high-capacity SD card for my phone, so I uploaded 14 gigs at the library. Then I picked up my resupply package, organized it, and we went out for dinner. I had a wonderful steak. Afterward, my brother-in-law and I went to the Banff Hot Springs pool, and there, some of my blisters got soothed, and some of the mosquito bites had the toxins pulled out of them by the healing waters of the hot springs. That concluded part 1 of Section C of the Great Divide Trail. The next day, August 1st, I headed out of Banff towards Field to complete Section C. The events on the first part had toughened me up quite a bit, and I found that I was able to handle colder temperatures and hike greater distances than ever before.
And now the airplane comes. Great. Cut.